Hello, Internet. Oh, maybe they can't hear
Good to
us.
see you again.
Now they can hear us.
I'm happy to see you too.
Yeah.
I was just telling Nick that we needed you back on the stream. I was like, we should get Rachael and Aisha on the stream.
I had Nick on the stream, like
I know.
on a Friday stream. We fought with Docker. It was fun. I'm really excited because we just had this conversation about like how to build community around your open source project.
Yes.
And as the community manager at Forem, like you're the expert in that.
Yay. Yeah, you know, I was kind of in the background while you all were talking about that. Like I could probably contribute to that conversation. Yes. Yeah, I am the open source community manager at Forem. And that's me. I do a lot of other things, but that's my main thing right now.
So you can confirm for us our earlier hypothesis, which is that communities are unpredictable in magic and there's no way to determine whether they'll grow or fail, right?
I think that's somewhat true, but also I think it really depends on those people putting in the time and the effort into the community. And Ben Halpern, who's the co-CEO now of Forem, put in a ton of time on Dev. So we have a pretty great community.
I have, as you can see by our AV issues, expended a tremendous amount of effort on Ruby Galaxy here. I am really focused on growing the community. We're working on it. It's a work in progress. This is an MVP version of the Ruby Galaxy community, and it's coming along just fine. Thank you very much. So tell us about Forem. What even is this thing?
Yeah, so most people, I think, if they've heard of us, they've heard of Dev. Forem is the open source software that powers communities like Dev. So they were Dev for a very long time, and then now we are Forem because Forem allows for lots of communities like Dev, but for all kinds of interests that people have. Like we have code newbies. So we have the code newbie community, we have Dev, but we also have other things like mixed martial arts and all kinds of communities. People who just kind of come up with stuff can build their own communities on this software.
One of them was, the other one is Code Newbies. Is that the other community?
Mm-hmm. That's the other, probably like more well-known in the developer space.
Is it codenewbies.dev?
And our community, the Relicants, too.
Yes, that's true. You are on Forem as well. So that was a newer development forum, the Relicants. So yes,
I've heard of them.
Yourself.
Yeah, we'll give our sponsor New Relic a plug here. Oh look, they're running a Hack the Planet hackathon with Dev. You all should go and submit to that.
It's big money.
Yeah, it's actually a lot of money. If I was not eliminated by the rules of the hackathon that I was involved in planning, I would be there. It's $5,000. Come on. It's codenewbies.dev or .to?
Let me find it real quick. So we have a plugin on our that you can use that you can switch between these quickly. So it's community.codenewbie.org. That's why it was hard for you to find.
Okay, I've been really killing it with the URLs today. So community.codenewbie.org. This is the other one. Okay. Oh, Saren Yupik's on there. Saron?
Saron
Yapark. Saron Yapark. Yes. That's awesome. Founder of Code Newbie. Yep. So this is one of the communities. There are many communities that are similar, and they all run on this GitHub project, which is Forem on GitHub. And you can set this up and run it yourself if you want to set up a community, or you can pay Dev or Forem. You can pay the company Forem. You can't pay the company Dev anymore because the Dev is not a company. The company's now called Forem, and their logo looks like this. It's a little green plant. And they build not a forum per se, although it's kind of a forum. I consider it more of an open community platform / blogging platform than a forum. But I guess when you think about it, they're not all that different, are they?
No, and some people have been using them in different ways. So some of them tend to be blogging like Dev or Code Newbies, and others are discussions where people just talk. So we have community, let me remember the name real quick, the community club. There's some like blog posts in there, but it's mainly discussions and people asking questions. So they're all community managers. So that's a little meta for me, but that's their thing. They also We have one called Flow State, which is all about like mental flow and performance. And again, that one's a lot of just like discussion on what people do to get into flow state or their mental health and things like that.
So when people are coming to these projects and they want to make a contribution to Forem, you have a contributor's guide here on this page.
We do.
And these come into your issues, but you also have them alongside many hundreds of other issues. I mean, it's a popular project, right? There are a lot of people contributing issues. Do you have an idea how long, or like, can you guess at how many issues per week or day you get?
Yeah, so actually before I came on as community manager, this is one of the reasons they hired me. Their forum was getting, their GitHub was getting a little out of control. They had like 800 open issues. I've knocked it down so far to 500 and we're going down more. But I would say on average, so we have a new process now. It used to be that we had bugs, refactoring, and like feature requests, which you'll still see some feature requests in there. But since I came on, we've kind of changed the model and we're not taking feature requests in our actual forum anymore. We're taking them at forem.dev, which is another forum, so that we can actually have discussion around them, because we have a new internal process so that it's called an RFC, which is a request for comments. And we want to actually communicate about these feature requests, because I think you guys had mentioned at the beginning, sometimes you get just like requests for all kinds of things and you can't take everything, right? You have to make decisions. And so instead of having these requests just sitting in this GitHub forever and being ignored, we are actually encouraging discussion around them and then deciding from those discussions that we're having if there's something valid for all of the forums, or even something like Dev, because Dev is our biggest forum. It's 500,000 people. So we do get a lot of requests just specifically for Dev, but we have to kind of have in consideration like all of the forums now, because this code is going into all of them and not just Dev.
So when you make a change here, it goes into the Relicans right away.
Yep.
What was your question, Rachel?
My question was, you have a lot of issues. It started at 800, it's down to 500. The thing I noticed is you don't have a lot of pull requests. And to me, when I see like code bases that have a ton of issues, normally they're paired with a ton of unreviewed pull requests.
Yeah, they've been knocking them out a lot quicker now. So again, even the pull requests were a lot when I first came on the team, but we've been able to knock them out a lot quicker now because of the new process we have. So we are actually pairing those specific issues that we have, because we've talked about them with product, we've talked about them with the whole team, we've talked about them with engineering. We can pair those issues with the pull request and get them done quicker. Also, I've encouraged people in the community to grab specific ones. We work with MLH, which is Major League Hacking. Every like 6 weeks, there are fellows who come in and they help us with different bugs or feature requests. So we have a couple things like that that help us get through those PRs.
Okay, how do you set that up? That sounds so cool to me, because like you're bringing in Major League Hacking to like have people work on like priority issues, and then you mentioned like you can figure out issues that you want to prioritize and have people work on. Like, how does all of that come together?
Yeah, so for me lately, one, there's the product side. So we have great product engineers, and they're the ones talking to people who have forums, who are the forum creators, and deciding, well, like what kind of issues or PRs they're having, and then prioritizing that when we need to. But then we also just have like people in those communities that are giving us issues or PRs. And so for me, I've started looking at patterns. So this last 2 weeks, I noticed RSS was a big problem within our repo. There were so many open issues for that I just compiled them all together. I gave them over to one of our engineers who happened to be on the OSS rotation, and I also gave them over to MLH fellows, and we knocked them out in 2 weeks, where they had been there for like 3 years. So a lot of it has just been me combing through, since I've come on here, combing through and trying to find patterns of things. We also had a ton of markdown issues, because the gem we use is a little bit different than what other people expect, and we had a lot of markdown issues, and so that was something else I compiled. I gave those over to the fellows, encourage people in the community to contribute to those specific bugs.
That's really cool. That mirrors something that Mike said earlier about looking for like patterns of issues that companies have inside of Sidkiq, right?
I was just going to say, Christina, a pleasure to meet you. I don't think we've ever met before, but I, if you've got 500 issues, you don't have 500 different issues. Yeah. You probably have more like 50 issues, and you've got 10 duplicates for each one, right? Yep. So it's nice that you can sort of collate a bunch of them together and knock out, maybe 50 issues with a week or two of work. Yep. So that's the pattern I've seen, and obviously it holds true for you too.
Yeah, that's definitely what we've been working towards now. One of the things that I spent a ton of time on when I first came in was just going back over all the old bugs that they had and seeing if they were still bugs, because so many of them weren't, or seeing if they were similar bugs like I just mentioned, so that I could be like, hey, this is where we're having, and that helps the engineers, right? So I'm not actually contributing to the code as a open source community manager. I'm the one making it easier for the engineers to be able to go ahead and fix all of this stuff. So that's kind of my role now. We had Stalebot, someone mentioned Stalebot, and it was really, really annoying for contributors because if you see, a lot of those issues were in there for a very long time, and it would constantly be like, stale, this is stale, and people were like, it's not stale, and we're like, so we got rid of Stalebot.
So the issues portion here and the pull request is where you spend most of your time as a community manager.
For the GitHub side of it, yes.
Okay.
So, I mean, a lot of my day is going through that because it was just so enormous, but there's other things I do as a community manager besides being on GitHub.
I understand community manager, it tends to be like 4 or 5 people's jobs rolled into a single human. So yeah. Maybe with respect to the GitHub portion here, when you're in here and you're labeling issues and you're triaging these things, do you feel like the community generally appreciates your efforts? What I'm getting at is that we spoke a little bit earlier about unruly members of communities, maybe people who have unreasonably high expectations for how they should be having their work prioritized by the maintainers of an open source project. Maybe you could speak to that.
Yeah, I think there's a couple sides to this. I think as an open source community manager, at least in my role, you kind of also have to go into it as customer success, right? Or customer kind of triaging of stuff. And so because they were a smaller team for a long time until they've grown now, and they had so many issues, me simply going back and communicating with some people who had open bugs and just saying, hey, is this still a bug? Can you help me figure this out if this is, and just kind of talking to people on those, particular issues has really made the community happy for most of them. But also because we did recently change our process with feature requests, I knew going in, and it was something that I said that I was going to be aware of, that we were probably going to have some people angry because people want their feature requests. Luckily, we haven't really had that many. I've closed, I don't know, probably 400, no, less than that, 300 feature requests in the project that just were not things that either were on our roadmap, were things that were so specific to just dev or one forum that it wasn't going to be for the whole community. And I've had 2 people upset. So, I mean, overall, it's been good.
You have any advice for Mike on how to make more issues for himself?
I think Mike's doing a good job. Maybe someday
hey, Jonan,
I'll get us down to 11.
Jonan, if you want to submit some code to me, I'll just merge it in sight unseen.
That sounds awesome. You're welcome, Sidkiq.
We'll let the community fix it. Just roll those dice.
Let's do it. What could go wrong? I'm sure that operating in the highly concurrent multi-threaded environment that is Sidkiq, I will do fine. I'll just
probably won't matter.
YOLO it. Yeah, it'll be okay. So if I wanted to make a change to Forem from the beginning, I can come in here and I can make a pull request. And am I trying to use one of these 106 labels to indicate to you something about that coming in, or is this?
You don't label, I label, so you don't have to worry about that. Really, when you come in, so let's take it from the perspective of someone who's new coming in, wanting to do something. So there's two sides of this. Either someone's opening an issue for the first time because they've seen something wrong, or multitude of reasons, or they see a specific issue already there and they want to create a PR. So there's kind of two different things there. If they're creating an issue for the first time, we have a template. And you as, contributors, if you can fill that out as much as you can and give us as much detail, we're much more likely to be able to help you out, and I can label them appropriately and we can get them fixed quicker. Sometimes we have very, very vague things. So it's a lot of conversation back and forth of like, hey, can you give me a little bit more information? If you go in and you see something like ready for dev or bug or a good first issue and you want to contribute, then your best bet is to go onto that issue and start communicating there. If there's not enough detail, like I just mentioned in the issue, then you want to talk to us beforehand and say, hey, do you have ideas on this? Is this something we want to implement? Is this something we want to fix? And just kind of have a communication within the issues, which is what we usually do with community members.
Christina, I've got a question for you.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like you are doing development on GitHub and you have discussion forums in your own software, which is great. I love the fact that you're dog fooding, your own product. That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Have you built in specific GitHub integrations into Forem to better allow those discussions to happen on Forem rather than in GitHub discussions? Things like highlighting an issue number, right? And so that you can mouse over the issue number and see a summary of the issue card, that sort of thing. Right. Have you built in?
We have some liquid tags that are like GitHub specific that you can put into Dev, Forem, any of those that will. So if I'm migrating over some of the issues that were feature requests, I just link to those and they show you basically like this whole like little card of like, what's the name of the issue, kind of give you a little summary. So that's helpful. Some of the other integrations. So when we decided to use Forem.dev, I brought up GitHub discussions first. I said, why don't we use GitHub discussions? We had the topic of, we have Forem.dev, we should be using our own, but also there's two sides of our community. Our community are developers and our community are people who are not developers. So if we were forcing everyone to just go onto GitHub, we had a lot of issues with people coming in and just not knowing what to do as far as like creating a bug report and things like that. And they feel much more secure being able to discuss and have conversations in Forem.dev. So that's why we use that.
Are you seeing a lot of issues come through on Forem.dev?
So this has only transitioned over the last 2 months that we just started this. And some of them initially I was changing over for people. Now when I close so a lot of our feature requests are really old, and I found if I just comment on them, people are like, I don't need that anymore, or hey, we already have that. But the ones where people really do want them, or they're newer ones, we do have pretty good discussions so far on Forem.dev. Usually they come in there, and then also at that point, again, I'm kind of moderating in Forem.dev as part of my role. And I can then say, hey, either I can answer their questions or I can get an engineer on the team that can answer their questions. So that's where it's been helpful.
I'm just like absorbing the knowledge here.
Yeah, I mean, one of the big debates we had was and one of the things that I think a few community members were like, why don't you just use GitHub discussions? And I was like, that's a great point. But we are more than just developers in our community, so we had to think of both of them. So that's where we got that decision.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny, some people think that if there's one solution for a problem, that everybody just needs to use that solution. Yeah. But the reality is that communication platforms and discussion platforms, there's a million of them, right?
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean that any one is less than the other.
Yeah.
I remember using BBSs and Usenet and then development platforms like SourceForge and GitHub and GitLab and this stuff evolves over time, but that doesn't mean make one tool any less or better than the other.
Yeah. It's also helped for us because we have Dev that's like 500,000 people. Over the years, we've created very good moderation tools. And though you can moderate okay on GitHub, the way we can moderate and we can filter out spam, and the way we can filter out just like, you know, our big thing at Forem is just like building inclusive and welcoming communities. So we have to be very careful, like moderation wise, and you know, you can get some not so great things sometimes in your GitHub issues if people are really upset. So it's nice to be able to moderate and, you know, downvote things, or, you know, be able to just be like, warn people very easily, like, hey, you can't, this isn't following our code of conduct and stuff like that. And so for us, it was nice to have those moderation tools that we already had spent so much time building.
Mm-hmm.
That really is a point where the tools have dedicated a lot of effort over the last 5 to 10 years, is moderation and codes of conduct. You know, 10, 20 years ago, you didn't see that at all. The internet was just a free for all. Usenet, anybody could post whatever they wanted on Usenet. And so you got a lot of abusive behavior. So I think it's great that the communities are maturing and bringing these tools to the forefront for people to use and to keep communities healthy.
Yeah, definitely. And it's nice because with our moderation, like a lot of times it's just like one extreme or the other. Like you keep it there, or you ban a person, right? Like we can suspend a person for a little bit of time. We can just warn a person. Like, you know, we want dialogue and we want open communication on our platforms, and occasionally you just gotta just a little warning, hey, you know, can you tone it down or something, or can you read our code of conduct? And we don't have to go to such drastic measures unless we really need to. So it's been nice to be able to use our tools in that sense.
Does that mean you're going to unban me?
Yes, sure.
Okay. I'm sorry I said all those things about Mike. Yeah.
Can I ask a question? How many contributors have contributed to Dev.to? Because your primary community is developers. So you've got a whole bunch of developers that are using your product.
Yeah, I think so far, well, I don't know how many is unique because we have our team too, but if you look at ours, we have 560 plus, so I think 571 contributors so far. Some of those are us, but our team's not that large, so take out like 20 or 30 of those is how many we've had contribute. Yep.
That's impressive.
Yeah, I mean, that was a big thing for Dev. Their push to open source is that they really wanted to kind of, you know, a lot of developers want to get into open source for the first time. We wanted to bring over that community that we had at Dev, where things are inclusive and welcoming and people could feel safe to contribute. And so I think once they did that and they open sourced, they ended up with a lot of great contributions and a lot of contributors. We also participate in Hacktoberfest the last 2 years, like one of like, you know, supporting Hacktoberfest and really encouraging people to contribute.
I see a lot of activity in the October section there of this last year.
Yeah.
That's what I made my contribution to. Benoit Idiot says, what do you think about GitHub reactions, the emojis? Is GitHub a good place to know what people need the most?
So one, I personally use the emojis a lot, just even if it's something like someone's put in an issue and maybe I don't have time right that moment to say something. I do the little eyes just so they know someone's looked at it, so they don't feel like, you know, they're being ignored. I think they're great when we celebrate people contributing, so we can do the little like party emoji. We don't usually get negative emojis very often in ours, so, you know, there's really only, I think, the thumbs down as far as the negative there. But a lot of it is like quick communication between all of us on the team, and then people contributing, you know, give a thumbs up, I understand what you're saying. And so I think it's useful and it has its place. As far as, is GitHub a good place to know what people need the most? For us, yes and no, because we are very developer centric, but also we have a product that isn't just for developers. We have to kind of think of things not just in GitHub, but in other places as well, and get information from the people who are actually like creating forums and what are their needs and what is, you know, what features do they want. So we kind of have to go back and forth.
Mike, what are your thoughts for Sidkiq and Faktory?
Vis-a-vis the GitHub reactions, or just
And
knowing
is
what
GitHub a good
customers
place
and
to know what
users
people
need?
need?
Yes and no. I talk to customers every day through email, and they'll generally say, this is important, or I'd like this. I also do a weekly happy hour. So for an hour every Friday, I'm available for video chat for anybody to talk with me about Sidkiq or Faktory or anything else. And so people will show up to my happy hours, and we'll talk about sort of what features or improvements they need. And so that's really useful to talk sort of, face to face, so to speak, and to hear them talk about their application and how they could use this improvement. That's really good for centering me in sort of their point of view and understand how they might use it. And that'll influence how we implement, how I'll implement that. Because I may think of it in a different way than they do. But yeah, it's either talking in happy hour, it's customer emails and support issues. It's GitHub issues that people open up. There's several different channels, and I don't prioritize one over the other.
I like the happy hour idea. That's a smart idea. I'm gonna have a happy hour where we critique Sidkiq.
A lot of people. Is that going to be weekly, Jonan?
Weekly happy hour, yeah.
That may get old after a month or two. Yeah, a lot of people seem to really like the happy hour idea. You can also call it like office hours. If you're like a professor, you think of their office hours. It really comes from that same vein of wanting to minimize the administrative overhead of like scheduling. Like if you've got 5 or 10 different people who want to meet with you, you've got to work out 5 or 10 different meeting times, and that back and forth itself is draining. And so this way I just say, hey, every time, the same time every week, I'm going to be available here, and you just click on the URL and boom, there I am. And so it's easy for everybody involved.
I love
that's
that.
kind of what that's kind of what Twitch is, right? Like it's come over to my happy hour and like I'm gonna be here for a certain amount of time and you can like talk to me. I think that's why I see so many people from the open source community that do very well on Twitch. Just because like they're like, I'm here, you can talk. Jonan, how do you feel about emojis and reactions? Your face is just like reactionless right now.
I was thinking through another question that I had. I apologize. About emojis and reactions, I think actually like they've changed discussion, and I'm not sure if they've changed it for the better. I think that there is this default now of dropping a bunch of emojis on things. Like if I post a thing in Slack as an example, there are emojis there that make no sense to me across communities. Like there's this tribalism that comes from, well, this like when I was on the one of the teams I was on back in the day, I think it was like early Heroku days, we used a little squirrel emoji to indicate that a PR was ready to ship, right? There's no world in which that is like normalized behavior, that you go to another project somewhere and you add a squirrel wearing a top hat.
And I forgot all about the ship it squirrel.
The ship it squirrel wearing a fedora. It was a ship it squirrel wearing a fedora.
That was a thing like 10 years ago.
Yeah, it was a thing. And now like I have a hard time keeping up. And so I'm a little bit get off my lawn about it. But I do think that, okay, I have to revise my earlier statement and say that in general it has improved things because there are more people being involved. I think there's a higher barrier to entry for someone to go and comment on a PR that they approve. And that's not actually particularly useful anyway, right? To have 20 people in a row be like, this looks good. LGTM looks good to me, looks good to me. We've evolved the conversation in that respect, but I wonder if something has been lost along the way.
I'm a higher barrier to entry, but I also think it's a nice way to contextualize a particular recommendation. So a lot of times when I go to an issue, I'll look down the issue list and somewhere someone will be like, here's a workaround that will have 20 like reactions to it, thumbs up, ta-da, like it's just all over the place. And I'm like, that's going to work. And then I'll see somebody else leave a like suggestion and it's got nothing, right? It's almost like inline upvotes, which is helpful context for me.
Yeah, I would agree.
And that's why I like it. I'm more likely to reply with a reaction than I am to like actually leave a comment. And it allows me, looking at a thread that has already existed, to leave my thoughts without being at the bottom of the stack, right?
Yeah. This makes sense.
I also think when you're answering stuff a lot, and a lot of times people take things that you say on the internet how they want to take it, and as much as you try to think through what you're typing and try a little happy emoji or something at the end where you're like, can really help sometimes with communication. I have found and really stop people from getting upset when they take something that you don't intend for them to take.
In general, I am a huge fan of emojis. I have provided far more emojis in my weekly executive updates maybe than were expected from the team. I think like of all of the updates, mine might be the only one that includes any emoji, and on many weeks includes more than 20 distinct emojis to indicate my feelings about various things. It does help in that respect, that we are trying to level up the medium to avoid that miscommunication that inevitably comes on the internet, where even a smiley face can be misinterpreted. Are you leering at me? You think this is funny somehow, that my issue here, is some kind of, what am I, a joke to you? Like, people can find things. I remember
someone telling me just the regular, just like a smiley face with just the little mouth was just like the rudest thing to put, and I was like, what?
It's very complicated. Is there a plant emoji in the forum, like Slack?
Oh well, yeah. The typical little plant emoji that you have.
Seedling.
The little seedling is what we all use for that.
And you use to indicate what is the question? See, because people do
Anytime we talk about Forem, so we have this like love channel. So when people have said something nice about Forem, or something's going well, or something, like on the interweb, someone has said something nice, we'll post it in there, and then people will just like respond with the little plant emojis.
We have like in the New Relic Slack, there's kind of a famous New Relic sticker that has the knuckle tattoos that say like nerd life on the knuckles. And we have one that is just the one half of the knuckles, which just says nerd, but it's used like a fist pound. But also you're just putting nerd on someone's message. You're like, nerd. Like there's the other half of the fist isn't coming through the screen.
My most used is a minion that's doing this, like, and the team has now associated me with that minion. So we had like a day where we just like posted like our top emojis that we use, and we put it in our internal forum, and we were guessing who, and everyone immediately was just like, that's Christina.
Yep. Someday when we get the Ruby Galaxy channel up to a place where we can have emojis, we'll have a cute little astronaut holding a Ruby emoji in our channel. I like that about Twitch, actually, as a platform, that you can kind of customize the emojis and everyone can have their own set of emojis. Mike, if you were an emoji, what would you be?
Oh gosh. I mean, the thing that immediately sprung to mind was a guy in a top hat and a monocle.
Like the rich guy from Monopoly?
Mr. Peanut.
Mr. Peanut?
Didn't they kill off Mr. Peanut? I want to say they did, but I don't know.
I feel like
anyway,
they did.
I was going to say about vis-a-vis emojis and reactions. I like it because it's just another tool for communication, right? Mm-hmm. Sometimes a well-spelled thank you is right, but other times just a simple heart or a thumbs up is also, just as good, or maybe more appropriate for the situation. The one thing I hated in GitHub for years is that people would put thank you in an issue, and then that would send an email out to every single person that had replies for that issue. And so I remember my inbox, I would put a comment on some issue, and that happened to be a popular issue. And then for the next day, I'd get like 100 replies with everybody saying this, that, or the other. And I didn't care. And so emojis really solved a lot of that problem, where people want to react, but they don't necessarily, it's not important where they where people should be emailed for that reaction, right? So I think it's just another tool for communication, which I think is always a good thing.
That's a great point, and I definitely appreciate that too, as someone who gets all of the like issues and things of emails that, you know, people want to respond and they want to say like, you know, thank you or something because you've said something to them, or I might want to say that to them, but just being able to just be like, yeah, or give them a little heart or something, yeah, definitely solves that problem. It's nice.
Do you use the inbox feature, like the notifications? I use my email for GitHub notifications about projects I care about. I'll get an email for one that I have subscribed to notifications for, which is not many. But when I go into GitHub, my eye almost ignores that little number in the corner now. Like it's almost meaningless to me, this thing. I know some people, that is their whole workflow. Is like first stop here and go through and they catch up with all the people they're following and figure out what's happening. I don't believe those people are real. Is that a thing that you do?
I do everything through email too, Jonan.
Yeah.
I don't go to the GitHub homepage and like look at notifications and stuff like that. That's meaningless to me.
Yeah.
It's just all in my email.
I don't think it's particularly helpful.
Yeah, it's
like I've gone to notifications before, but it's not. Also, you asked what emoji we were, and I have emotes.
Oh, tell us what your emoji is.
I think mine. So I like put all of them in there, and then I was like, I think I am the really like chunky Ruby typing on a keyboard. I think that's me.
Oh, I like that one.
Bongo Kitty. I want to be Bongo Kitty.
Okay. I'm not sure if I'm supposed to reveal this yet, but my moderator is actually working on making a Bongo Cat version of like the typing Ruby.
There you go.
These emojis that we're seeing in the cat are all of your cat, Ruby.
Ruby and Pearl.
Ruby and Pearl. For our confused
I clearly
audience.
have a preference for Ruby.
Yes. Our confused audience who might be looking at those and saying, I don't see a Ruby typing on a keyboard, nor do I see a chunky Ruby typing on a keyboard. Ruby is the name of Chill's cat.
Nice.
Ooh. If you're in chat and you have my emotes, which emote are you?
There we go.
Tell us, chat.
Mm-hmm.
The world needs answers. Answer me. I think that
if you have somebody else's emotes, you could also answer with those.
I want to choose an emote for myself. I'm going to be the ship it squirrel now and forever. And that's going to be all of my emotes when I get to a point where I can add emotes to Twitch.
They can do. Mm-hmm.
I'll just use the ship it squirrel for all of them.
Perfect. Picando Codigo says the ship it squirrel is still a thing.
Oh, yeah, I saw that. Exegete, is that how I say this one? Exegete 46 has chosen Pearl sleeping on a bed. Is that Pearl?
Yeah.
Oh, Pearl has the white-faced kitty. Okay. The ship it meme with the fan and the hair. No, no, that is not the meme. Were you watching earlier with the GIF? You were. You saw that. Yes.
Exegete was the one who recommended that we make that the permanent ship it meme.
That may end up being one of my emojis. It's funny because that was one of the very few times in my career where I worked in a proper office. We had a door and it closed. And me and my mentor had an office to ourselves so that the rest of the team couldn't hear him berating me for not knowing all of Ruby yet or sending me, let me Google that for you links. And I was responsible for walking on my standing desk and blowing my hair in the wind.
Nice.
That sounds very painful.
It was actually,
you got a real office?
I got a real office. It was fantastic. They later moved us into the sales pit. So that's not a great place for software developers, for anyone watching. If you're going to put them anywhere on earth, don't choose the place next to the salespeople talking on the phone. That's, I mean, literally.
Jonan, I'm going to go out on a limb here and suggest that if any place is called a pit, probably not a good place to work.
Not where you want to go.
What about a fish tank?
The fish tank, yes. The fish tank is another good term for a place you don't want to work, probably. Like, I'm imagining a glass room in the center of an office filled with developers, and everyone just watches them. Just don't tap on the glass. You'll disturb the next release.
This makes me really happy. I've always been remote.
Yeah.
I have my own space. tell people all the time, I have my own space, so I can like dance, speak, do what I want while I'm programming. No one has to see me.
Yeah.
We're good.
I like working from home. I think it's gotten a lot harder lately with the remote work and the rest of the industry catching up and trying to figure out how to do this thing well.
Yeah.
Mike, you've always worked remotely, or am I wrong?
Once I started my business, I've never had an office. I had a co-working lease for a short while, but I've primarily worked at home for the last well, how long? I guess I've been on my own for about 6 years now. Sheesh.
Wow. Didn't you used to
Yeah.
do a co-working thing downtown every week, like a lunch and Ruby?
Yeah, we had Ruby lunch monthly. But yeah, that came out of me working for myself and working at the co-working facility and just wanting to interact with my fellow Ruby nerds.
Yeah.
So we had that went on for about 5 years, I'd say.
So that, I think, is a good example of building community. Like that was actually a really, it was kind of the hotspot for a time. If you wanted to go and meet new local Rubyists, was there more to building that than just, hey, I send an email to the local PDXRB?
No, not really. I mean, that was basically it. It was just 5 minutes a month where I just composed a quick email saying, hey, we're going to have lunch in, 2 or 3 days here, show up. And I mean, so many programmers work by themselves or maybe work remotely with 1 or 2 other people. And so, if you want to get out of your grind and to meet some new people, sometimes just going to eat lunch is a sort of a low barrier to entry, sort of low cost way of just, meeting some new people.
Yeah.
And eventually we got to the point where we had, I'd say 5, 6, 7 regulars that would show up, and we all knew each other and could talk regularly about problems we were encountering or challenges, what have you. But it was a good way of getting out of the typical daily grind that you might be in. Do
you have any advice for me in creating a community if I were to start such a thing? Like, I don't know, a meetup for the whole galaxy about Ruby. What advice would you have for me in developing community around that?
Well, first of all, don't do it during a pandemic.
Yeah, that's another good.
Probably advice number 1. I mean, that's so much of it's contextual, Jonan. It's hard to just narrow down advice. People like to eat, so a lunch is kind of a no-brainer. People eat lunch every day, so typically, so that's kind of your lowest common denominator. Everybody does this, so try and center, and then there was 2 aspects to it. There was the Ruby and there was the lunch. So we had lunch, but we were also calling out Ruby as the thing that connected all of us. So that was the one thing that we shared, where anybody that showed up there, we could say, hey, what's your connection with Ruby? Tell me how you got started. Tell me, have you done any open source work? And so it's a natural conversation starter.
I think that's exactly what we've done here. Like, we all share a galaxy, and we're here to talk about the galaxy that we have in common. It's a perfect thread that ties us all
What's your
together.
favorite star in the galaxy, Jonan?
My favorite star is Sirius, because I'm a serious person. Very serious all the time. And
Makes
Sirius
a lot of
Black
sense.
is a personal hero of mine. That's not true.
Good choice.
Let's try this. I want to try this icebreaker. Chat, how did you get started with Ruby?
Tell us how you got started with Ruby while Christina gives me advice for leveling up Ruby Galaxy's community. How do we make people like us and stay here forever and never leave?
Be consistent. I think a big thing in community is just being consistent, and whatever you're deciding to do, like, you can be be flexible, but also be consistent. So if you're going to stream to build your community, Rachael probably has a better sense of this, but even us at Dev, just from the beginning, we knew we weren't going to have very many people at first. Just consistently having like a slot that people expected, just like Mike was saying, hey, it was this, day and this, lunchtime. People knew what to expect and when to come. So staying consistent in something and then just kind of power through and know that like for a time there might be a lot of people or there might not, and if you stay consistent and listen to the people around you. So I don't know how many people like for some communities I've had in the past, some of the things I've had to think about was like, I'm a mom in tech, I have 4 kids, so if I wanted to do something, I thought of other moms and like or other parents and the time of day and the different stuff like that we could do stuff, or the kind of community we'd want, because are we going to be fine with people bringing kids? Of course we are as parents probably, or do we want to all be away from our kids for a little bit? So you have to kind of read the community and what you're trying to do. And then I think honestly the biggest thing is consistency, because when Mike was saying they did it for 5 years, right, the lunches, the first thing I thought was, wow, he probably stayed very consistent in this, and that's why it was something that was able to go for a long time.
Yeah, Christina, you make a great point. I think the one thing you want to do is build muscle memory in community members so that they know exactly what to expect. So, for my Ruby lunch, it was always, first Tuesday of every month at noon at this place. And
Yep.
so you didn't even need to get the email. As long as you knew that and you remembered it, people could just show up. Exactly.
Yep.
So it's a really low barrier of entry, and you just sort of train people to understand that this is how the community works. And once you do that, then it can snowball.
Mm-hmm.
That was very conveniently on the first Tuesday. Sorry, Rachel, go ahead.
I was going to say, we've got some answers from chat. So like Exegete says that I was looking for a web framework for a project at work and all the cool peeps were talking about Rails. I wanted to be cool. It worked. And then, oh, no, wait. Sorry. That was Mutant Neutrinos. Exegete says I was looking for web frameworks. I found Rails. It was too magic. So I built an app in Django in 2013. Once I understood the magic better, I went back to Rails. And then Hybrid Basis says it's the language used at the bootcamp I'm currently in. I've played around with Node and Python, but I much prefer Ruby. And then Apic Arcasir says, I'm just getting started for real. It's hard to say. A couple of years ago, I tried to write an event registration system for the convention I code-read. And then Picando Codigo says, I discovered Ruby from reading programming blogs and magazines or whatever. But what really got me into it was the community. After I went to my first Ruby conference, I decided that was what I was going to use. What's really interesting in here is that like 4 out of 5 answers involve a web framework known as Rails.
Yeah. What is your...
That's what got me into Ruby too. I when DHH introduced Rails with that build a blog in 15 minutes,
yeah,
I saw that, and I had been doing Java web development, and my mouth hit the floor because what he did in 15 minutes would take me 2 or 3 or 4 days to do in Java. And so over the next year or two, this was in 2004, 2005, over the next 2 years, I said, I'm gonna find my next job in Ruby. I'm not gonna, I don't want to do Java anymore. And so I didn't know anything about Ruby either, just like everybody else out there. I made some really crappy Rails websites and just iterated and got better and better. And you keep building prototypes, you keep iterating on your code. And it took me 6 months to really understand what a block was and why blocks were useful in Ruby. Mm-hmm. But once it clicks, then you get better and better. And now your Ruby goes from being garbage Ruby to start looking more idiomatic. And that's when you're starting to get a hang of your tools. So it's a journey that every programmer has to go through, but don't stop. You'll get better at it as you iterate.
Blocks took me forever to understand. That was by far the hardest part, I think, of Ruby. Getting used to the idea that I'm passing these mystery chunks of code around, and sometimes I'm passing them when I don't realize I'm passing them. It was a big hurdle to overcome. I think that's the kind of thing that leads people to think that Ruby is magic, or we get a lot of criticism of Ruby or Rails as being magic. I think those levels of convenience, though, once I have gotten over the bump, have really been central to what makes Ruby such a joy to program in for me. Like, I wouldn't want, most of the time I will choose Ruby just because it's so easy for me to accomplish a thing I can imagine in my head. What were you going to say, Chao?
I was going to say that I came to Ruby the same way. Like, I came through Rails, and I find that that kind of magic is what really appealed to me about it, because it's beautiful. And like when I look at a scaffold and I look at the fact that I can literally create a web app very quickly and I can iterate on it and I can expand its feature set, it's incredible. So Picando Codigo came to Ruby the same way that you and I did, Mike, like started in Java and then transitioned over to Ruby. And like, I just remember how painful Java was. I'm kind of wondering, like, first of all, I want to hear how Christina came to Ruby, whether that was like a deliberate choice or whether it was part of the Forem move. But also, like, I wonder if those generators and scaffolds are part of what made Ruby feel so magical.
I have a confession for you all. I am not a Rubyist. I do manage a giant Ruby OSS, open source project, but I myself am not a Rubyist. I am a front-end developer. However, I do get to learn it almost every other Wednesday with Nick when we do the Twitch pair programming with community members. So that has been fun and definitely something I'm interested in diving in more, because right now I mainly do front-end stuff, but knowing a back-end language is always something that I'm interested in.
I think regarding magic and Rails, people have always called Rails too magical, and there's certainly a gamut from zero magic to nothing but magic, and Rails is in that spectrum somewhere, right? And everybody has a different tolerance for magic. I find that you can tolerate magic a lot more when you actually understand how it's working. It's when you have no idea how this thing works and you just type in a magical one-line incantation and all of a sudden it starts working. That's when I think people are frustrated. And I wholeheartedly agree with that frustration. As a developer, you always need to understand what's going on a level below where you're writing code. And the whole point of the magic is you don't understand what's happening under the covers. So I think people are right to call Rails. Rails is a little too magical for my tastes, but I tend to be a little more explicit in how I do things. But again, everybody's tastes are different.
Yeah, I remember the first time that I cracked open the Rails source code to debug something and just being kind of like terrified of this massive open source code base and trying to find my way through it. And as I came to understand a little bit better that this was just like any other code I'd seen, that I could follow the path of execution and figure out what it was that was in fact happening with those, the mystery went away and the magic went away. Now I understand the value of having that help. I mean, that's why you can make a blog in 15 minutes. In the remaining 9 minutes of the show here, we could definitely ship a Hello World Rails app live to the internet. Like, that's a thing. That's not true of most any other language or framework. I too got my start in Java, and it was so painful that I effectively left the industry. I didn't code for 10 years after I came out of college because I was pretty sure I didn't want to be a programmer. And then I sat down one time, I was a poker dealer at the time, and I sat down at my break and I'd started poking around Ruby, and I wrote out on like a series of napkins, like some Ruby code. I was like, I wonder how I would write a Ruby hand simulator for poker. And so I wrote it all out in just what I thought was pseudocode, and I went home and I typed it in, and it ran. Like, my program ran without bugs. And I thought I was just writing pseudocode and kind of making it up as I went along. And I knew that Ruby was my language then, that it was so convenient and natural for me to write, even with the few language constructs that I knew at the time, that I was bought in then from that moment on.
I love this.
You basically got struck by lightning.
Yeah.
That never happens.
Mutant Neutrinos has a recommendation here. They said, I just worked through Noah Gibbs' book, Rebuilding Rails, which does a nice job of demystifying some of the fundamental Rails stuff by teaching you simplified versions of how it's implemented under the hood. Pretty nice. Yeah. I'm adding this to my book list now.
Speaking of book lists, I would like each of our guests to recommend a book for our friends about Ruby or about community or about front-end development. You can do one about JavaScript, but it can't be about transpiling JavaScript because I hate transpiling JavaScript.
I've got two recommendations, Jonan.
Yeah,
okay.
Go for it.
So the first recommendation is Nate Berkopec is writing a new book called Sidkiq and Practice.
Ooh.
And do you know what it's about, Jonan?
I think it's about kicking your friends.
It's about Sidkiq.
Oh, that's a better one.
So he sent me a pre-production, draft or whatever, and so I read through, and it's it's 100 pages of good stuff so far. But it amazes me that I have a project that's successful enough that people are actually writing a book about it, which it just blows my mind. Talk about another definition of success.
If you were to handpick someone from the Ruby community to write that book too, Nate Berkopec is the person. Nate is
he certainly has his niche.
Yeah.
That he has come to dominate. Yeah.
Go ahead. What was your second book?
The other book, the book I just finished, is called Caste, which is about racial relations in the United States and the history of race. It's really good. It teaches a lot of history that we never learned. But it is so interesting and very apropos given, events over the last couple of years. So yeah, it was a good read too.
That's Caste, Caste.
Correct.
Yes. Sidkiq in Practice coming soon. Caste actually released now, and you can read
Yes.
it. And Christina, what is your
Bingo.
book recommendation?
Yeah, so this is not necessarily programming, but I think it helps programmers. It's called How to Take Smart Notes. It's not a super long book, but it's a really interesting book. It kind of changes the way I think a lot of us think of how to take notes as we're reading different books. A lot of times we're just like underlining things and not really thinking about it, and we never go back to it. And it teaches you the mental model of, as you're going through, if you find something actually interesting, you're going to take that and you're going to reword it in your own, your own words, whatever you think is interesting, so that you know it. And then you're going to keep that in some kind of specific notes that you can link to. And it really helps you build up. So I do a lot of content as a developer, and I always have. It helps you build up content pretty quickly. And it's content that you can then take from different things you're learning and put it together so that you're not just regurgitating what other people are saying. And so I think it's really helpful. And so that's one. It's How to Take Smart Notes. And then the other one that is community kind of focused is called People Powered by Jono Bacon, and it's one I'm still working through. So if it's not that great, you'll know why, but I've gotten through most of it and I've actually really enjoyed it. So
Nice. I'm taking notes on all of these books. Shell, your turn.
Are they smart notes?
They are smart
I like
notes.
practical object-oriented design in Ruby. That's my favorite. Also, my second book is, I have a book that's coming out in 2030, and I'd just like to pre-promote it. Got you, Mike. Jonan,
I
do you have any books?
have a couple books. One of them is about magic. There's a book called Metaprogramming in Ruby that is brilliant and a really good picture how to do this. There's another one. Help me out, Mike. It's got a microscope on the cover. It's Ruby Under a Microscope is the name of the book.
Yeah, Ruby Under the Microscope.
Ruby Under the
That's
Microscope.
by
Pat.
Pat O'Shaughnessy. Is that his name?
Yeah, Pat O'Shaughnessy was, brilliant blog and book to go to if you're trying to understand the magic. At the finest level of detail. Every time I write a blog post about Ruby or about what's happening with a new change in the Ruby language, I reference that book to find out about the feature and how it actually works under the hood. It's a fantastic resource. So I have those two books, and if you're looking for one that is unrelated to those, unrelated to programming, I recommend Alchemy of Air, which is the story of how we came to a situation where we're able to pull nitrogen out of the air around us and turn it into fertilizer such that we can sustain the world's current population, where we would have previously been capped at about 2 billion people. So those extra 5 to 6 billion people all depend on this one chemical manufacturing process that was invented. So we are at time, and I thank you all for joining us, and I hope Chael, that you were logged in as us because I can't raid, but you probably could.
I can raid.
We're going to go raid someone. This is our first raid stream. Have you ever raided anyone before, Mike? Christina?
No, we haven't yet, but it's something we'll probably do eventually.
This is very exciting times.
I don't know what that is.
It's when you drop into another person's channel and you take it over and kick them off the internet. It's not quite like that. You send all of the viewers at the end of your channel towards another channel from someone who is doing other fun, similar things. Thank you for coming, Exegeted. It's been a pleasure having you. We are raiding Pachi Codes. Pachi is a member of the Relicans at New Relic. Thank you again to New Relic for sponsoring, and thank you to GitHub, and thank you to Forem. Thank you, Christina and Mike, for being here. It's been a pleasure having you.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
Thank you.